Dad, who is kind only a younger mother has the capacity for hearing. Every little sound in the quiet room made my heart skip a beat, fearing the exposure of this secret to the light. My hands tightened around the blanket without my conscious awareness, and my breathing became more regular and consistent. The sound of wind blowing through the crack in the door was simulating the slight tremors that my voice was experiencing. While trying to say each word, my throat tightened, and I felt like I was holding something that was about to burst. The greetings go to all of you. I am Lila, and today I will tell you a story that I once thought I would never tell again. I will tell you about something that happened to me. Unfortunately, I bear the responsibility for this story. This strange story, which seems like it could only occur in movies, actually happened to me. Despite my best efforts to forget about it, it haunts me every day. Due to the fact that the wounds I caused were not only emotional but also resulted in a loss of trust. I believe that I will never be able to make amends for my mistakes or find peace with my mother, my father, and I make our home in the quaint community of Carmel. I am a lovely young lady. California by the sea is a place that exudes a sense of peace and poetry. My father, Ethan, who owns a well-known seafood restaurant in the neighborhood, always takes excellent care of his body and enjoys going to the gym. He is almost 50 years old, but he still enjoys going to the gym. The fact that he has a toned and strong body gives the impression that he is much younger than he actually is. Despite the fact that he is firm and decisive, he is always helpful to me. My mother, Mira, is a teacher of literature at the high school that is located right next to our house. She is a gentle and kind person who has a particular fondness for reading classical literature. While she is reading books by the window in the warm light, she never forgets to give me advice and demonstrate how much she loves me. She does this every night because she loves me. From childhood to adulthood, the love of both my mother and father, who have dedicated their lives to caring for and protecting me, has always surrounded me. When I was little, every time my father came home from work, I would run to him and throw myself into his arms, my little arms wrapped around his neck, and hug him tightly because, to me, my father was always the safest, most secure place, as if just being in his arms, everything would be fine. I didn't think much. I simply felt safe and loved. I was also a liberal girl who loved fresh and beautiful things. I often chose for myself the most beautiful and gorgeous dresses I had. Every time I felt like this, I would run to my parents, spin around a few times, and wait for their compliments. Because they loved me, my parents always smiled, complimenting me with eyes full of pride. These simple yet heartfelt compliments made me feel like the happiest girl in the world. Every time something like that happened, I would run to my parents, spin around a few times, and wait for their compliments. Because they loved me, my parents always smiled, complimenting me with eyes full of pride. Those, though simple, made me feel like the happiest girl in the world. After every dinner, when the whole family gathered around the TV screen, I had a habit of sitting on my father's lap. He often held me in his arms. Hugs were gentle and warm. I grew up receiving such pampering, to the point where it became a difficult habit to break. As I grew older, I continued to maintain the habit of sitting on my father's lap, as if I were still a little child in need of his love and protection. That habit, to me, was a bond. A small joy that I never wanted to leave, but recently every time I sat on my father's lap or ran to hug him, the feeling was not the same as before. There was something strange in the air. I couldn't help but notice that he no longer accepted my hugs naturally like before. Instead, there was a pause, and sometimes his arms tightened a little more than usual. The way my father looked at me was also different. It was no longer just the gentleness and warmth of a father loving his child. There were times when I could clearly feel the confusion in his eyes, as if he was hiding something that I couldn't understand. At times like these, my heart beats faster, as if my intuition tells me that something is wrong, but I don't want to believe it. Maybe I'm thinking too much. Maybe it's just a passing feeling, but no matter what, this abnormality always sticks with me, making me feel that things are no longer as simple as before. As I said, my father likes to exercise, so even though he's old, he still maintains a strong and stylish body like when he was young. He's not only a father but also a model of strength and charm that I look at my father. I can't deny that he's still very handsome with broad shoulders and a toned body. Every time he walks by, I still feel very fond of him. A strange feeling that I can't clearly define. Maybe it was the confidence he exuded or the strong appearance of my father that still brought back memories of my childhood, when he was my entire world, but lately that feeling has changed slightly. It was more than just a daughter's admiration for her father. It was an indescribable feeling. My father was already there when I arrived home from school one day, as he always is during my return home. In most cases, he arrives home before my mother does, and once he does, he occupies the sofa and watches television with his eyes fixed on the screen. As soon as I walked through the door, I was still able to see him sitting there in a calm and familiar manner. Despite the fact that I was an adult, I ran up to him and jumped on him, feeling as though everything was so natural. It came to my attention that I was staring at my father for a longer period of time than I normally would, and that whenever I was in his presence, I experienced a change in my internal state that I perceived as being out of the ordinary. I sat on his lap like I did when I was a child, and without a second thought, my father hugged me as he always did. However, this time something was different. The hug was still warm, but the atmosphere between us was different, which made me feel less comfortable than I had before. Despite this, I tried to push the feeling away by telling myself that it was just my imagination, but it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. While I was sitting on my father's lap, I became aware that something was touching me. I initially thought it was my uncomfortable seat or his pocket, but as I sat there, the presence grew increasingly apparent. At that moment, the atmosphere felt strangely heavy and stuffy, and my heart began to beat more quickly. This closeness, which had always made me feel safe, now made me feel uneasy and uncomfortable. I felt awkward because I did not know what to do regarding this situation. My father's eyes were reserved and silent, just like mine, and we both said nothing. We just sat in the stuffy atmosphere until my mother suddenly walked in. I desired to rise in order to disrupt the atmosphere. However, I felt as though my legs were ensnared and I was unable to move. I sat still, trying to keep myself calm, but my heart was filled with questions that I couldn't answer. Rather than making any kind of statement, my father simply stared at me, and I was unable to recognize him in his eyes. My mother's arrival abruptly shattered the reassuring familiarity of the past. I could clearly feel the change as my father seemed to care more about me and started asking me more frequently about paying attention to the little things in my life. Despite the fact that everything appeared to be normal on the inside, I could clearly feel the change. The strange feeling was still there, weighing heavily on my heart like something that could never return to the way it was before. We quickly looked away from each other in an effort to break the stuffy atmosphere, and I swiftly got up and tried to act as normal as possible. However, the strange feeling was still there. He had never noticed before he started buying me new clothes and things that I didn't ask for. Those gifts confused me at first, but gradually I realized that this care was not like fatherly love anymore. Every time it happened, I couldn't deny the strange feeling. It was like we were becoming a couple rather than father and son. The distance between me and my father was not just physical. His gaze became distant, and the moments of silence were longer than ever. I felt something change in the atmosphere between us, but I didn't know how to face it. Then one day, the day when the boundary between me and my father was truly broken, it was a mom will. I will never forget that day my mother had to go on a business trip due to the school's proposal, leaving only me and my father at home. I had just returned home from school and entered the house when I was met with a completely unexpected scene. On the dining table, my father had prepared a sumptuous dinner. The atmosphere in the house suddenly became different, almost a bit romantic. Candlelight flickered, the aroma of delicious food filled the air, and a pair of red wine bottles graced the dining table. My father had prepared a sumptuous dinner. The atmosphere in the house abruptly changed, taking on an almost romantic feel. The candlelight flickered, there were already 2 bottles of red wine on the table, and the food smelled delicious. I couldn't hide my eyes widened as I laughed and asked my father, "Why are you so thoughtful today?" I still believed it to be a joyful coincidence and had no reason to suspect anything more. My father, with his usual smile, replied that he had something positive to say at the restaurant, something successful that he wanted to celebrate. I was also pleased and didn't ask any more questions. I just wanted to enjoy this dinner with my father. We sat at the table eating and drinking together. The wine flowed evenly in the glasses, and the soft candlelight made the scene warmer and more intimate than ever. I didn't feel anything wrong at that time. Everything seemed too normal, too familiar. But from within this closeness, it gradually took on a different meaning, a feeling that I couldn't put into words. I ate and confided, recalling stories from my childhood, when I was the little girl who always clung to my father. Sweet memories, little jokes. All of them made us both laugh as if all the tension from before had after finishing 2 bottles of wine. Laughter echoed in the warm room, and the atmosphere between us seemed closer than ever. I felt myself starting to get drunk. My mind was hazy. The alcohol seemed to blur all reason. We sat closer to one another, and I am uncertain if it was the alcohol or something else. But a question unexpectedly escaped my lips. "Do you like me?" I asked in a quiet voice, but it wasn't like a child asking a father. Rather, it had a deeper meaning, as though I were asking from a viewpoint that my sober mind would never permit me to express. After a brief period of silence, my father turned to face me. His eyes were deep and thoughtful, as if he was examining something within me, and he responded with a warm voice. His response was a single word, yet it carried a weighty and profound meaning. We both looked at each other in that moment. The space that seemed to freeze between us was no longer the closeness of father and son, but a different connection beyond all the limits I had ever known. I don't know what drove me at that moment. Perhaps the alcohol played a role, or perhaps the long-suppressed emotions went unspoken. I gently reached out and hugged my father's neck. A strange feeling invaded my whole body, but I didn't stop and didn't think anymore. I only knew that, at that moment, I couldn't control myself. My father paused for a moment, but then he returned my hug. His arms wrapped around my waist, hugging me tighter. The distance between us was no longer there. We looked at each other, our eyes meeting for a long moment, as if no more words were needed. We both seemed to understand each other's hidden thoughts. Without words, we kissed each other slowly and cautiously at first, as if we were rediscovering a familiar tenderness, but after a few seconds the hesitation disappeared, giving way to an intense, overwhelming feeling. Our hugs became tighter and tighter, not just to get closer, but as if we wanted to hold on to this moment forever. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt the warmth of my father's body making everything around me disappear. My father began to gently touch my back. His hands seemed to explore every line, every breath. The initial tenderness gradually gave way to longing caresses, as if my father could not control the rising desire. His fingers slid over every part of my body, cautious yet greedy, as if he wanted to explore everything without missing anything. Every touch, every gesture made me shiver, as if my skin knew how to respond to his every move. My father picked me up gently but firmly, his strong arms holding me tightly as if he didn't want to let go. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling each of our rapid breaths. He walked without hesitation, leading me into the room where there was no light except for the dim light from outside. At this moment, we no longer cared about anything else. Not time, not space, but only each other, as if the world had stopped at this moment. Thoughts vanished, revealing only a profound longing and an inexpressible deep connection. My father positioned me on the bed, and our lips reunited, blending in luscious yet intense kisses that seemed unbreakable. I could feel his hot breath mixed with the rapid beat of my chest. His hands began to move deftly, slowly unbuttoning my shirt with each touch, each button undone. The feeling of being naked came from both my clothes coming off and our vulnerability. That feeling made my heart race, but at the same time, all the reservations gradually disappeared that night. Nothing could hold us back. We broke all barriers and reservations, leaving the world with just the two of us. Every gesture, every touch, had a deeper meaning, as if wanting to engrave each other's image into our minds and bodies. They gave each other everything, not just physical intimacy but also the fusion of emotions and secret desires that had been suppressed for so long. That night, both of them understood that all boundaries had been erased, and there was nothing but each other's absolute presence in that. When my mother got home the following day, everything appeared to be back to normal. My mother did not notice the change in the atmosphere the night before, so we had breakfast together and talked about everyday things like a normal family. However, I knew that we both understood what had transpired, despite maintaining our natural appearances. Deep down, There was a heavy silence between my father and me, and every look and gesture had a different meaning, as if we were sharing a secret that no one else could know. Despite knowing it was wrong, we continued our meetings. Then, on a particular evening, my father sneaked into my room without my being able to hear a single sound from him. My mother was fasting in order to get to sleep. I had not yet awakened from my deep sleep, and I was totally oblivious to the fact that my father had been lying next to me with his arms wrapped around me. The peculiar warmth surrounded my body as soon as I opened my eyes. Upon turning my head ever so slightly, I became aware that his well-known face was present quite frequently. Even though we both knew it was inappropriate, neither of us intended to stop every touch or look that suggested we would continue without making any promises or words. My lips formed a gentle smile, and I gave my father a tender hug after a brief moment of surprise, as I was unsure of what to expect next. At that very moment, I was completely oblivious to everything else, and my father and I were the only ones here. "Mom won't hear you, so don't worry about that, Dad." I spoke in a hushed whisper, my voice shaking softly like the icy breeze that was blowing through the crack in the door. I struggled to say each word, as if trying to hold back something that was about to boil over. I had a tight throat, but my heart was beating strongly and erratically in my chest. My hands unconsciously tightened the blanket in an attempt to control the trembling that spread throughout my body. Anxiety that remained unseen to me caused my breathing to become increasingly ragged. The room was strangely quiet. The fear of others discovering our secret, our adventurous love, was pounding in my heart as we tried to hide it. Gradually, the fear of discovery turned into an obsession, and I found it impossible to resist Dad's advances. Even the smallest sound of stirring or whispering set my heart racing. I realized that I couldn't escape this relationship, even though I knew it would end badly. Then, on the day that I had been trying to avoid, it finally arrived, and my mother called to tell me that something had happened. She couldn't come home as planned, and she would only return the following morning. The thought of no interruption that night brought a momentary sense of relief to my father and me. We didn't worry, thinking that we still had time until the following morning. My mother unexpectedly returned earlier than expected, without any prior warning. We were living without a car, so we did not realize that she had entered the room. Before that scene, she had been silent, and I knew that everything had come to an end. It seemed as if the entire world collapsed before her eyes. During that moment, I felt suffocated, and I was unable to speak. In addition, the atmosphere in the house seemed to put a stop to everything that was going on between my father and me. After revealing all the secrets, the days that followed were filled with a profound silence. As a result of the atmosphere of tension and heaviness that permeated the house, there was no room for tolerance or sympathy. Upon confronting the horrifying reality, my mother quietly departed without making any statement. Ultimately, due to her absence, my mother filed for divorce. My parents' decision to end the marriage, which I once believed to be unbreakable, left me to deal with the remnants of a once happy family. The house was cold and empty as a result of this decision. This decision left me in a state of chaos, uncertain about which path to choose between my mother and my father. My father, who had previously been a supporter of mine, had now become the cause of my breakdown. I realized that my erroneous emotions and lack of strength had led to irreversible consequences. I also realized that my mother, who had loved and cared for me ever since I was a young child, was now emotionally distant and carrying an insurmountable pain in her heart. Choices that I never in a million years imagined would have such devastating consequences ruined my entire family. My mother, my father, and I all lost trust in one another as a result of the damage, and I finally realized that all boundaries in family relationships need to be respected because once they are broken, love, regardless of how powerful it is, cannot undo such serious mistakes without a significant amount of effort. At this moment in my life, I find myself at a crossroads, unsure of where I will go or who I will return to continue my journey. I am uncertain about my ability to confront my parents and whether they still have space in their lives for me. My former family is now nothing more than a painful memory, and I am uncertain about what the future holds for me. To deal with the consequences of what I've done and live with this pain indefinitely is all I know. People who are listening to this story should always be attentive and maintain boundaries in any relationship, especially within the family, because love and closeness can sometimes blind us and lead us to make poor decisions that we never thought we would make. This is my final advice for those listening to this story. Remember, every action has consequences, and some mistakes are irreversible, resulting in eternal sorrow and damage. After hearing this story, I understand that many people will criticize me, claiming that I've done unforgivable things, yet they feel justified in their actions. Since everyone has a different opinion, I am willing to consider them all. We sometimes have one chance to protect our most valuable possessions, and if we don't, it could become your biggest worry. I am grateful to everyone who took the time to listen to my story. Don't let your lack of strength guide you down paths you'll regret for the rest of your life. It's crucial to respect boundaries, safeguard love, and maintain trust within the family, as crossing them can never return to their original state. Please assist me by giving this story a like and subscribing to the channel if you believe it is significant. This will ensure that you do not miss any of the subsequent stories. Many thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.